This is the story of my life. How everything changed because of a web novel that no one else seemed to notice. For 10 years, I read a serialized story that had no readers but me. It was called 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. It had 3,149 episodes, yet the average view count was only 1.9. I always wondered why no one else read it. To me, it was a masterpiece. Who would ever bother to read a web novel with over 3,000 episodes? Only me. And even then, it took me a decade to reach the end. That moment, a notification popped up. This is the last episode. I froze, wondering if this was really the end. My name is Kim Dokja, the only reader. That is how I introduce myself when necessary, though most people misunderstood. 9 times out of 10, they thought I meant I was simply an only child. In truth, my father gave me this name, hoping I would grow up strong and independent. But to me, the name always felt like a curse. Loneliness defined me. I grew up without siblings, without close friends, and even now, I lived single and unnoticed. I graduated from a third-rate college. I was employed as a contractor in a subsidiary of a large corporation. My existence was ordinary and unstable, drifting from one job to another. My only real hobby was reading serialized web novels on the subway after work. But that subway ride was unlike any other. I sat there, reading, fully immersed in the novel. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed someone approach. Yoo Sang-ah from the HR department appeared and sat near me. She asked if I was on my way home. For a moment, I couldn't believe it. Yoo Sang-ah, the most popular woman at work, admired by everyone, even noticed by those far above me. To run into her like this felt surreal. I thought about how different our lives were. She was diligent, hard-working, someone who seemed destined to shine. I was just an ordinary man, clinging to a story that no one else read. Yet strangely, she stayed and talked with me. I found myself noticing her in ways I never had before. The reason she had so many admirers was clear. She had a warmth, a kind of radiance that people gravitated to. But none of it mattered to me, or at least that's what I told myself. Because no matter how much I looked at her, Yoo Sang-ah and I lived in completely separate worlds. Still, she asked about the book I was reading, curious about it. I told her it was a Korean web novel, and she admitted she also loved books, though her tastes were in celebrated authors like Murakami Haruki and Raymond Carver. I couldn't say the same. My favorite stories were the long, endless serials that accompanied me through every hardship of my life. That was what 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse was to me. More than just a book. It was a companion. When I was bullied in middle school, it was there. When I failed my entrance exams and ended up in a third-rate university, it was there. Even when bad luck placed me on dangerous front lines during military service, it was there. Even now, as an unstable contract worker with no real future, it was still there. Always. It had been there. And now, it was ending. The series was immense. 3,149 episodes, a journey that began in my teens and ended in adulthood. The first chapter once had over 1,000 views, but by the 10th chapter, only 20 remained. By the 50th, it was 12. Eventually, it dwindled to just 1. Me, the only reader. I often wished I could give something back to the anonymous author, but I had no money to spare. So I left my thanks and comments, and that was all. I recommended it to others, but no one ever understood. They mocked me for it. Still, it was my world. Yoo Sang-ah's words faded into the background as I thought about this. She had her own successes, recently promoted to full-time while I remained a disposable contract worker. She was diligent, I was not. She studied while I wasted time reading. In another story, she would be the heroine, and me, I would be the background character, the reader, never the protagonist. Yet in my heart, I wanted to live differently. I wanted to live my own life. At that moment, something unusual happened. I received a message from the author of 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse. He thanked me. He said he could finish his story because of me, the only reader. He told me that he had even won a contest and that the novel would soon become paid content. He wanted to send me a gift, asking for my email. I was shocked. All these years, it had only been me. Only my silent presence kept the story alive. I imagined the gift might be something simple, like a $50 card. But when I opened the email, I realized what it meant. The novel would become paid content at exactly 7 p.m. It was 6:55. I had 5 minutes left. I panicked, wondering if I would lose everything, the story I had clung to for 10 years, the world I knew better than my own life. What would happen when it disappeared? And then, the lights went out. The subway shuddered. Fires broke out in the city beyond the windows. People screamed, convinced it was a terrorist attack. Panic spread like wildfire. I checked the time on my phone. It was 7 o'clock. A deafening thunder rang in my ears, and then a message appeared. The free service of the 8612th planetary system has ended. The main scenario will now begin. And in that instant, the genre of my life changed forever.
A creature called Dokja appeared in the sky. Someone on the platform shouted when it sprang into view. I did not know why that sentence popped into my head then, but the subway stopped and the entire cabin went dark. The opening lines of a very familiar story kept crossing my mind, though none of it made sense. Yoo leaned closer and whispered the word Dokja. I thought there was no way this could be real. I remembered the first chapter, where a downy creature in a straw garment floated in midair. Now, a small creature that matched that description hovered above us. Everyone watched it in shock. Fiction and reality were overlapping. The Dokja spoke in a language I could not understand at first. No one on the train knew what it was saying. Only I recognized it. This creature had appeared in the opening paragraph of the novel I had read for 10 years. In the story, the Dokja had heralded a tragedy that stretched over thousands of chapters. I could not believe the same being was in front of me. Someone nearby thought it might be Spanish. Another person took out a phone, as if filming a movie. The Dokja then spoke in English, and a strange thing happened. A language patch loaded for everyone. A 12-year-old boy asked his mother if this was a cartoon. People laughed nervously. I told Yoo not to move. I knew how the story went. The Dokja admitted it had miscalculated. It said that putting a paywall around 7 in the evening would get the most customers. It asked the crowd to stop talking and listen. For a moment, people argued about compensation. They demanded consent. A little boy clung to his mother and whimpered. Then, the Dokja grew angry at the noise. It scanned the cabin and shouted for silence. One of the boy's heads exploded. He died instantly in front of his mother. The Dokja began killing people one by one. Blood spread quickly across the floor like spilled ink. It proclaimed that our lives had been relaxing and privileged until that moment. Breathing, eating, excreting, reproducing, none of it had required payment. That era was over. Nothing was free anymore. People begged, offering money and cards. Mr. Han from finance stepped forward and promised to give anything the creature wanted. He reached into his wallet in panic. The Dokja only smiled and tore Mr. Han's card into pieces. It explained in a way that made my skin crawl that money had value only within the confines of space and time. Paper meant nothing in the macroscopic dimension that now ruled us. It threatened anyone who tried to bargain and warned that there was no time for chit-chat. Debt was piling up as if by cosmic bookkeeping. The Dokaebi told them to start earning their worth. It floated higher and declared that Channel 7623 had opened and that the constellations were entering. A small status window blinked into existence in the air in front of everyone. I saw one in front of me, too. The text read that the main scenario had arrived. It ordered us to prove our value by killing one or more living organisms. A time limit of 30 minutes appeared beneath the demand. The Dokaebi wished us good luck and laughed, pleased at the chaos it expected to watch. Then it vanished, leaving the carriage full of dying, bleeding, and terrified people. I hated to admit it, but my disbelief was gone. Doubt dissolved like sugar in water. The world had turned the page and become the story I had read for a decade. The rules from that book were active. The novel's cruel logic governed reality now. People screamed and tried to help each other, but no plan could stop the scenario's edicts. I remembered every detail of those early chapters. I remembered how the Dokaebi's arrival always meant the beginning of a test, and how the tests demanded impossible choices. I also remembered the 3 ways to survive, the only lines I could trust now. My hands trembled as I tried to think. Yoo Sang-ah sat frozen beside me, eyes wide, clutching her bag like a lifeline. Bodies lay splattered along the aisle. The air tasted of copper and fear. Outside the windows, the city burned, and the sky burned too. The status window above me blinked again, counting down. 30 minutes. The scenario had begun. No one had asked for this. No one had consented. Yet we were trapped inside the story's mechanics, each of us suddenly a character with a forced role. I had spent 10 years living in the margins of that story, proving my loyalty by reading it alone. Now, the book repaid me by making my knowledge a burden and a weapon.
Yoo Sang tried calling the police, her hands trembling so hard that she almost dropped her phone. I already knew what would happen. No one would answer. The line was dead, just like in the story. She looked at me, confused and terrified, while I forced myself to stay calm. Panic wouldn't help. None of this made sense to her yet, but I'd already started to understand. The creature floating in front of us, the Dokaebi, wasn't something from our world. It had appeared out of thin air, its antennae twitching as it observed us like we were toys in a box. Around us were bodies, a grotesque pile of corpses in what had been an ordinary subway car just minutes ago. The air smelled of iron and smoke. Office workers were cowering, their faces pale and stained with blood. An old woman sat praying, her voice trembling with every word. Even now, part of me didn't want to believe it. I wanted to think this was a nightmare, but I couldn't deny it anymore. Everything around me, every event, every face, every scream, it was all from 3 Ways to Survive the Apocalypse, the web novel I had been reading for over 10 years. Somehow, impossibly, it was happening for real. A system window hovered in front of me, cold and merciless. It told me to prove my value by killing 1 or more living organisms. I stared at the message for a long time. It didn't care about reason or morality. It just waited for me to obey. Before I could move, a young man stepped forward, trying to take control. He raised his voice and demanded everyone calm down, claiming this was a national emergency. The others yelled back, questioning who he was to give orders, but I already knew the answer before he even said it. His name was Lee Hyun-sung, an army lieutenant from the 65th and 102nd Units, the Steel Swords Master. Seeing him in front of me was surreal. I had read about him countless times, imagined his bravery and loyalty, but now he was real. Flesh and blood, standing inside the same subway cabin as me. But something was wrong. He wasn't supposed to appear yet. In the novel, he didn't show up until after the first scenario. The story was already starting to change. Lee Hyun-sung was trying to reach his unit. He said he couldn't contact the Blue House directly, which matched the story perfectly. Everything was happening exactly as I remembered, down to the smallest detail. That was what made it terrifying. Then the broadcast began. The Prime Minister's face appeared on every screen in the cabin, declaring a Level 1 national emergency. He said there had been unidentified terrorist attacks in Seoul and across the country. The passengers murmured in confusion, wondering why the Prime Minister was speaking instead of the President. A moment later, the answer came. The President was dead. They called it a terrorist attack, but I knew better. This wasn't an act of terror. This was the first scenario, and right on cue, the Prime Minister was killed on live television, his speech cut short by a violent explosion. The Dokkaebi reappeared, grinning as it hovered over us. It mocked humanity, saying it had warned everyone that this wasn't a joke. Then it decided to raise the difficulty. The timer for our first task, killing another living organism, was reduced to 10 minutes. And there was a penalty. If no one died within 5, everyone in the cabin would be wiped out. The panic was immediate. People screamed and begged the lieutenant for guidance, asking what they should do. Lee Hyun-sung tried to calm them down, but fear was spreading too fast. Yoo Sang clutched her phone, shaking uncontrollably. I could feel my own heartbeat pounding against my chest. Everything was unfolding just like the novel. The dialogue, the events, the order, all identical. But one detail was wrong. In the story, another person was supposed to appear by now. Someone crucial. My gut told me that person would arrive soon. Then a scream came from the next cabin. Someone had been murdered. The passengers rushed toward the door, but when they tried to open it, the metal blazed with light. An invisible barrier blocked the way. No one could enter or leave. The Dokkaebi's voice echoed around us again, dripping with amusement. It said that no one could move between cabins until the scenario was complete. Then it mentioned that some cabins were moving faster than others, and decided to give us a little jolt.
The lights dimmed, and a new image appeared before us, a classroom filled with students from Tong Girls High School. The countdown had reached 0. The girls screamed as their heads exploded one by one, blood splattering across desks and windows. Some tried to run, others begged for help, but there was no escape. It was a massacre. The passengers around me cried out in horror. Yoo Sung-ah covered her mouth, trembling as tears fell from her eyes. I just stared in silence. I had already seen this before, in the story. The system message appeared just as I expected it to. Survivor of Channel 23515, Lee Ji-hae, 2nd year, Class B, Tong Girls High School. The Dokkaebi burst into laughter, thrilled by the bloodshed. To it, this was all just entertainment. But to me, it was the beginning of the end, the opening act of the apocalypse I had read about for years. And now, I wasn't just a reader anymore. I was one of the players.